Hey y'all, welcome to WTF History, where we examine fucked up shit that's happened in history and find similarities in current events. I am your host, Marissa J, and this is your trigger warning. I don't make sensitive content for sensitive people. We talk about fucked up shit that's happened in history. So if you do need a trigger warning for anything, let this be your trigger warning for pretty much any of my videos. Thumbs down it if you need to. Find something else to watch. I don't really give a shit. I know I look crazy right now with the shawl and everything. It's unusually warm outside, so I have a romper on, and it says babe across the front of it. I'm not about to change clothes at all, so I know I look crazy. However, the focus of today's topic is not what the fuck I look like. So with that being said, let's start the show. So let's first go over the story of Cudjoe. Was a man that was born in Benin, and at 19 years old, he and his family sat down to have dinner and discuss traditional tales as they did when a group of armed people, also known as the Dahomey tribe, which was a neighboring tribe that did this to several people, they grabbed him, they beat him, they told him to tell his family goodbye, and he never saw them again. He was then taken to a port, loaded up onto a ship with 20 other people, and after 70 days on the sea, they arrived in Alabama. They burned the ship. They actually just found the remains of the ship in 2019, but they had to burn the ship because Cudjoe came here in 1860. The transport of people from one continent to another, that was outlawed in 1807. At this point, it was 1860. So after they burned the ships, after they burned the ship, they stayed in the Alabama swamps for several days just to be separated once again from this new family that he had gotten. He was traveled 70 days with these guys, and he then had to say goodbye to them once again as they were being sold off to different people. One day while Cudjoe was working on a boat with him and several other enslaved people, a group of Union soldiers walked up to them and informed them that they were now free. At this point, Cudjoe had no idea what to do because he had not a dollar to his name, not a pillow to his name. So he was expecting 40 acres and a mule, but just kidding, because he didn't get that. A lot of people didn't get that. So Cudjoe and 31 other formerly enslaved people were able to save up enough money to buy a piece of land in Mobile, Alabama, and they called it Africatown. Africatown still is around today. And there's like a whole issue over in that we can't even just get into in this video, but maybe another video. Fast forward roughly 100 years later, about 90 years later, in 1953, there were these two guys, Oscar and Fred Dial. Oscar and Fred Dial, they ran a farm. And so when the busy season hit, they were usually low on labor. So what their favorite thing to do was head down to Meridian, Mississippi, and pick up people that were in jail for fines. This particular time, in 1953, they picked up two guys, Coy Lee Tanksley, and it's either Hubert or Herbert Thompson. I've seen both spellings. We're going to just say H. Thompson. So H. Thompson, he had a debt of $50, and I don't recall what Coy Lee Tanksley's debt was, but he did have a debt. And so Fred and Oscar Dial, they paid those debts off, took these guys back to Alabama with them to work off this debt. This is called peonage. Peonage has been outlawed since 1870. It's been outlawed because it's like, it's slavery. Like, you just trick somebody into slavery. There's this article, it's in the New York Times, I think, and I believe it's called The Damned. And it's about this guy who was just minding his own business, and he was just walking along, and this other guy in a carriage pulls up to him, and he's all like, hey, you want to ride? And the dude's like, yeah, sure. And so he gets in the carriage, and the guy, and he's like, do you want a sandwich? And the guy's like, yeah, sure, I'm a little hungry. And the dude's like, hey, you accepted this sandwich from me, so boom, you're a slave now. Like, fucking insane. So that's pretty much how people did. Because you can never work off that debt. If you ever seen The Walking Dead, think about where Beth, where she's taken, after the whole prison thing, her and Daryl escape, and then she gets kidnapped from the people at Grady Hospital, and then they're like, hey, we saved your life, so now you have to work off this debt. That's called peonage, okay? That was outlawed in 1870, all right? So that's basically how it is. You can never work off your debt because you're paying for room and board, you're indebted for room and board, food, clothing, like all of that shit. So you can just never work it off, so you're just always a slave. You know, that's how they were able to kind of trick these guys into slavery. After about a month, H. Thompson was like, all right, I'm done. Like, I've worked for you guys for a month. I've had to have paid off this $50. I'm gonna go. And they were like, yeah, it doesn't work that way. And he was like, but watch me go. So he left. And Oscar and Fred Dial, they told a group of other enslaved people that they had on the farm to go after H. Thompson. So they hunted him down, brought him back, tied him to a tree, and then at gunpoint by the Dial guys, 6 other enslaved people were forced to beat H. Thompson within an inch of his life. They let him go. 2 days later, he dies. So, how'd they get caught? They ended up calling a black funeral home to pick him up. Now, maybe wondering why in the hell would these guys who just murdered someone call a funeral home to pick up the body that they just murdered. The reason why was because it was Alabama in 1953. So, they call a funeral home. Funeral home turns out to be a black-owned funeral home. The people at the funeral home see this body, and they're like, what the fuck? He's obviously been beaten to death. So they took pictures of the body and sent it to the feds. The feds were like, what am I looking at? Like, what is this? So the feds ended up sending the pictures over to Frank Johnson Jr., who was the U.S. attorney at the time. So in that region. So it comes across his desk, and he's all like, hey, that's fucked up. So FBI, go over to their house and go and see what the fuck is going on. So the feds show up, they bust in, they see what's happening, and they're like, we don't know what's going on here. Everybody is going to jail at this point. Like, we don't know what to do because nothing seems legal about any of this shit. So they just arrested and indicted everyone there on the spot. But what they didn't realize was that even though some of these people that were on the farm, they seemed complicit, they were still enslaved. they were an enslaved person. They weren't able to leave the farm if they wanted to. So all of the charges were dropped on everyone except for Fred and Oscar Dial, who was charged with the fancy words for being a fucking slave master. And Fred got an extra charge of peonage. So, convicted in 1954. Here's the messed up part about all of that. They only got 18 months. And then they were just let out. One of them lived well into the 90s. Like, well into the 90s. Which means a convicted slave owner was alive and well while I was alive. Like, I was a kid in the 90s. Like, I was a kid in the 90s. He was alive while I was alive. And I know that I'm wearing this shawl and everything, but I'm really not that old. So that's kind of fucking weird. I tell you these two stories because they have certain similarities. As with Cudjoe, in his case, you've got the Dahomey tribe. Okay? A tribe of African people, black people, that were running around and kidnapping other black people to sell to white people, to sell them across the world, okay? They knew that this shit was outlawed back in 1807. So there's blame to be had. In the Dial case with H. Thompson, the people that ran after him, the people that tied him up to a tree, the people that beat him to a pulp. Yeah, they were enslaved people, but not all of them. I mean, like, yeah, they were held at gunpoint because a couple of them were like, yeah, I don't want to do this. The majority of them were like, yeah, let's beat the shit out of this guy. On the stand, one of the character witnesses for the Dials admitted that he knew that Fred and Oscar Dial were beating the shit out of black people on the farm. The defense attorney was like, he freaked the fuck out. He was like, oh my God, like, he didn't mean to say that, y'all. He was just joking. Like, that wasn't a real thing. He just playing. Dude was like, what did I do? What did I say wrong? Like, he said, and I quote, it's okay to beat niggers in Alabama. It's okay to kill a nigger in Alabama. That's what he said. So that was the sentiment of a lot of people in Alabama in 1953, 54. So even though some of the people that beat H. Thompson to death were enslaved, they were still more than happy to do it. Okay? During slavery, you had a certain hierarchy. And if you haven't seen my breeding farms video, I know it kind of drags on. There's no visuals to it. I'm sorry. I'm learning and I'm growing. But if you have a second, go check out that video. There's a lot of information in there. But there is a hierarchy. There was a hierarchy on the plantation. And certain people got certain privileges. With certain males, they got certain privileges for doing certain things. One of the things that, listen, we're going to say it, okay? We know the house nigga. We know who the house nigga is, right? We know a house nigga when we see a house nigga. We know a Sambo nigga when we see a Sambo nigga, right? So you have those guys. Those guys sometimes got to graduate to be overseers if massa likes you, okay? Because they were aware you've got to have a black person around because you got to have a black person to kind of to wrangle them all in to make sure that they don't come after us, right? So they got to graduate to the overseer. Then sometimes, if they were really trustworthy, they could be part of a slave catching group. So the runaway slaves, you would have black slave catchers. After slavery ended, what did you have? Well, you had what has evolved to the modern day police force. During the Jim Crow era, you definitely, absolutely, positively had black units, maybe not in every single police station across America, but at least in the big cities. You had a black unit. There were black cops that were there to police black people. And by policing, I mean upholding the status quo. So that's never changed, okay? From the bloodhounds that the slave catchers used to the German shepherds that the police use today. Like, nothing has changed. Nothing has. So here's the thing. I don't want to just bring issues to YouTube. I would like to bring some sort of solution as well. I don't have all the answers. I couldn't possibly have all. I don't have any of the answers. Okay? Yeah, I don't know what to do. I wouldn't know how to fix this. But I do know we got to start somewhere. So I would love to hear your suggestions as to what step, second step, third step is to how to move things forward, okay? Because things can't continue to go on the way that they have been. As for solutions, this is the first one that I have, okay? Because it seems as though cops are just so terrified. They're so scared. If you're so scared to pull somebody over during a routine traffic stop, you are in the wrong line of business. Get out of it. Don't do that. Why are you traumatizing other people? It's sick. So here's my suggestion. What is the point of having body cameras if no one is reviewing the footage? Every single police officer needs to have their body camera on. If you turn it on, it immediately alerts some fucking body, and they call you and say, hey, officer such and such, go the fuck home, because you turned your body camera off. So now you got to go through 6 weeks of training and some more bullshit so that way you don't turn your fucking camera off the next time. Don't turn your camera off. Don't obstruct it. Don't turn the microphone on. Don't do that. Don't do that. So what is the point of having the cameras if no one is reviewing the footage? I don't think that certain police stations should have like their own little unit, because that own little unit will see these police officers every day. Oh, we'll just make sure that they review them on the different shifts. No, outsource that shit. And not to regular schmegular cops, to regular schmegular people. Okay? As a matter of fact, let's take it a step further. Every single police officer should have to upload their body camera footage, have it a live stream, have it on YouTube. That way anyone can see it. And I think that that would really help out a lot of police departments, because a lot of police departments are afraid and worried about, like, what about the storage space? There's got to be a ton of storage space, right? Well, if you're live streaming it, you don't have to worry about the storage space, because I'm sure that there will be a very nice, kind, concerned citizen that will record it all for you. So that way it just takes the guesswork out. It's so great that the Memphis police chief came out and said all of the right things. because anyone with half a brain would go out and say all of the right things, especially in this climate, right? People have been calling into news stations saying that, hey, I've called and I've complained on the Scorpion task force and they did nothing about it, right? People keep doing that. People keep saying that. Okay. They've disbanded the Scorpion task force. That's great. That's great. They just did that like a day or two ago. Just did that a few days ago. And it's not just certain units. It's not just certain Scorpion units. All cops. All cops. Let me not say that. Let me shut the fuck up. So anyhow, those are my suggestions, and I would love to hear yours, so put them in the comments below. That's it. Bye. Bye. What you want me to do, a trick? Bye.